Hello, Flat Earth researchers, debaters, and debunkers. I'm just going to go through a brief section of this conversation between Scimandan and Chris Lintott, who apparently is a bit of an expert on stars and all that stuff. Now, Scimandan is well known to so-called flat earthers because he often does hit piece videos. But one very interesting aspect of this particular piece of the conversation is quite revealing because we see what Scimandan doesn't understand about or is ignoring about the people he makes fun of, namely flat earthers. And it also illustrates how Scimandan doesn't understand the model that he believes in and promotes, the heliocentric model in which we are on the outside of a spinning globe. So it's a great example of the kind of compartmentalized explanations that people like Scimandan like to come up with as so-called proofs for their belief. So before we go on, I would just like to give a shout out to Mr. Cheswick, who highlighted this particular piece of this conversation in one of his recent videos, now that his channel is back up and running. So please go and pay him a visit and give all due respect to him for pointing out this particular conversation. He raised a very good point in his video. I just want to go a little bit further into what I said just now about the ignorance or the misunderstanding that someone like Scimandan has when it comes to his so-called debunking of so-called flat earthers. So let's have a listen, and I'll stop it at various points where something needs to be pointed out.
Conspiracy Cats is the guy who who's co-host with me. We are both people that try and debunk conspiracies on YouTube using science.
Okay, he said we are both people who try to debunk conspiracies on YouTube using science. Now he's talking about another guy who has a very similar format, Conspiracy Cats. Now, first of all, let's talk about what the meaning of conspiracy is. There is no denying that people conspire. It could be people in a boardroom having a meeting to decide what kind of marketing plan they're going to use to sell a product. Or it could be politicians collaborating to create laws, or maybe have laws enforced in order to generate more income for the treasury and fill the coffers for the government. They would conspire and collaborate and have meetings behind closed doors in order to create something, some kind of, it could be a concept, it could be a belief, it could be a public relations drive, whatever. And of course we see that happening all the time. Parents even will conspire against their children, and children or siblings will conspire against their parents. So conspiracies happen all the time. In fact, even in one's own head or mind, you can create a conspiracy and be kind of doing things or thinking things that go against your natural instincts just because of a certain belief that you might have. So conspiracies happen all the time, everywhere, in every single aspect of our lives. So to then say that you debunk them with science is also another fallacy, because Scimandan and Conspiracy Cats have done nothing more than sit behind microphones, often reading scripts, and they're often making hit piece videos about so-called flat earthers or the people that are questioning the heliocentric belief. And their so-called debunking is nothing more than repeating the same old explanations that we all know from childhood, because they've been repeatedly told to us to have us believe in certain things. So that is no different to any other religious text that is promoting some kind of belief. And again, a lot of the time it's often open to interpretation. So there's no real science. None of these guys have ever done a practical demonstration in all these years of their so-called debunking of conspiracies none of them have actually done an experiment. None of them have actually gotten up from behind their microphones and done anything practical to prove a point. All they've done is cited the same old explanations that we've all heard since we were in school and told to believe that we live on the outside of a spinning globe, because science. So, well, that's that bit. Let's move on here.
And a lot of those people have a strong belief that space is a fictional place, doesn't exist. So how does that make you feel, considering what you do, that there's people out there genuinely that don't think space is real?
Well, I have questions.
Yeah.
For starters.
Right.
Okay, good, great. He's taking it very well, Chris, on the right there. So, as we said earlier, Chris is an expert on stars and things like that. So he will, of course, believe that stars and galaxies are billions and billions of light years away, and will have all these preconceived ideas about what they are. And so Scimandan's point there was that so-called flat earthers have this strong belief that space doesn't exist. Well, the point is that nobody really knows what lies beyond what we can see and experience on this earth. And when we are given so-called evidence that people have been to the moon, or that probes have been off into distant planets, and we see on scrutiny that a lot of these pieces of evidence have been, for some reason, put together with green screens or wires. I mean, basically, with if you actually look, then you'll notice the discrepancies, and you'll see that for some reason they've had to fake footage of people on the ISS, or we never actually get any images or anything of satellites, and we don't have any real images of the Earth from space. So all this so-called space exploration over the past 100 years or so has never resulted in an actual photograph of our assumed globe Earth from space, hanging there around the sun with the stars in the background and all these other things. When you actually scrutinize the evidence that we have been given, and yes, you can assume that at some point somewhere a couple of people or more might have conspired to create a belief, then you can realize and see for yourself with your own eyes that space, or the concept of space, has clearly been faked. So why would they do that if they are actually doing stuff in space? Or what are we not seeing? How come, for example, the ISS doesn't have a window or a camera pointing up at the stars as it goes around the Earth? Why only look down on the Earth from the same height that could be achieved with a drone or an aircraft or even a balloon going around and around? Why do we not have some wonderful images of space like we would see from the Hubble telescope? And this is another thing. If you look into that, you can find out that the Hubble telescope was put on a 747 along with other telescopes. And so there isn't any proof that there's a telescope floating around in space up there, but there is proof and records of these space telescopes being housed on large aircraft that are sent up as high as they can, and then pictures are taken from these aircraft. So whether people are conspiring or not, what we have is evidence of how they have done it with something that is physically possible, an aircraft, and zero evidence of something like the Hubble telescope floating around in an orbit around us up in space. Even the people working on the Hubble program don't really know where that telescope is at any given time. They're not tracking it. It's all done on calculations and assumptions. So this is why we have this strong belief, as Scimandan puts it, that space isn't what we are being told. And now we're going to get to this question about the physics of space, the assumption that space is a vacuum, allowing everything to travel frictionlessly, around the Earth, the Earth, which again is a concept that has been extrapolated from something like Galileo's experiments with marbles, where it was, it's a thought experiment that if you continue it and you assume that there is no resistance to something, whether it's a bullet or a cannonball or a marble or something, some kind of mass that's being pushed or thrown in a certain direction, if there is nothing to create any resistance, even air, then this would allow these objects to travel indefinitely. So the whole idea of a vacuous space is a concept for the heliocentric model that allows the planets and everything else that's supposed to be spinning around up there, including the Earth, to be assumed as being another planet, to go around and around the sun indefinitely, because it's not encountering any resistance. And we come to the difference. We're going to talk about gravity now, so let's just hear what Scimandan says here.
Well, I'll be the space denier, because I know a lot of their answers.
I guess I
Now he should know a lot of the answers after several years of trying to debunk us. But from my own experience, he'll just cherry pick and then come back with an explanation, and doesn't listen to the actual answers that are given, or the explanations, or the reasons why one should doubt the so-called science behind the heliocentric belief.
I need to know what you mean by not real.
Okay.
I think.
So one of their big things is that they cite the second law of thermodynamics as to why there can't be an atmosphere next to a vacuum through entropy.
Okay.
All right. So we're all very familiar with this, and actually, let me just let him carry on, because I think he makes another point.
I mean, obviously they don't,
because magic. Pseudo-physics reasons.
Exactly, yeah, and they don't subscribe to gravity, so they're not taking gravity as an answer why they.
Okay, so this is the example of how, first of all, Dan doesn't understand what flat earthers or basically real questioners, truth seekers are asking about the model, and it also shows that he doesn't really understand the model that he's defending as well. So he said that we would deny gravity and then cite the second law of thermodynamics. So thermodynamics is something that can be demonstrated. It can be demonstrated with a container, and we can change the temperature of gases, and we know that they will expand, and we can assume that there are molecules that are bouncing around and they are trying to go all over the place. So basically, we know that gas expands in all directions, and this is the essence of the law of thermodynamics. So the temperature of a gas will make a difference to its expansion, and it expands in all directions. Now, the whole thing about gravity is that, well, the understanding that we have when you think about it is that the gravity is assumed to be a force created by, in this instance, the mass of the Earth, and it is supposed to attract other masses towards the center of the spherical Earth. And of course, this works nicely for any kind of mathematical concept, because when you have a circle or a sphere, then the mathematics gets a little bit easier than an uneven, than if you imagined it was a block or a square or something uneven. And we have then the inverse square law applied to that. So the greater the distance from the center of gravity, the weaker that force of gravity becomes. So let's just be clear about that. The idea of gravity is that the more mass something has, the greater the gravitational attraction to another mass, or to the Earth, as it is assumed. So obviously a car is so apparently heavy because its mass has a greater attraction to the Earth than, say, a feather, which doesn't get pulled down to the Earth with as much force. So when it comes to molecules, if that's what they are in the air, then of course molecules being super light with hardly any mass whatsoever, then even if you assume that there is gravity holding things to the Earth, of course, you need gravity to be able to somehow stick to the outside of a rotating sphere, because we know that there otherwise in our practical experience there's no way to do that. So if you assume that we live on a globe, then you have to assume that there is some kind of force that makes us stick to the outside of the sphere in all directions. So this is where gravity comes in. So the theory or the model for the globe is that the more mass something has, the greater the gravitational attraction. So air molecules and things like that, as well as the practicality of the law of thermodynamics, means that gas is not affected by any assumed force of gravity. So even if you incorporate gravity into your model, gas and air is not held on by gravity because it doesn't have as much mass as solid objects, which are said to be heavy because they create a greater gravitational attraction. Do you see what I mean? So even if you incorporate gravity into your model or assume that there is some kind of force that works in the way I've just described and is always has been described like that, then air molecules and whether it's other gases, heliums, neons and things like that, will not be held by any imaginary force of gravity. So this is what Dan's not understanding. We are pointing out that in the heliocentric globe Earth model, even with your assumption of gravity to make you stick to the outside of a sphere, that doesn't fit with it contradicts what actually happens, or it contradicts the idea that gravity will hold gas molecules around the Earth anyway. It wouldn't work, even if you factor it in. Yeah? So whether you assume gravity exists or not, it's not a strong enough force acting on lightweight molecules to hold them in. And you can't have a pressurized system next to a vacuum without a barrier. Means that if there is no barrier, as is assumed in the globe Earth model, then yes, the air would get sucked off the Earth to fill up the vacuous void of space. So, do you see what I mean? It doesn't fit with the model. And this is a great example of the compartmentalized way that they'll look at certain aspects of the model and never really try to put them together.
The atmosphere sticks to the planet. So in their eyes, it should be sucked off the planet.
Oh, I see.
So
because gravity doesn't exist either, or something like that. Right.
Yeah.
All right. So neither of these guys have actually thought about it properly. It's not that gravity doesn't exist. Even if you assume that there is gravity, it wouldn't hold on gases around the Earth anyway, would it? Because the principle of gravity is that the more mass something has, the greater its attraction to the center of the Earth, pulling it down towards the Earth. So lightweight molecules wouldn't be affected by gravity. They would obey the demonstrable law of thermodynamics rather than the man-made law of mass attracting mass, which is not demonstrable. The law of thermodynamics is demonstrable. Gravity and the globe is not demonstrable.
Okay, I've got you. Well, first of all, I think your people are interested because I encounter these people mostly because they send me theories of the universe.
Okay.
And I don't have a lot of space doesn't exist. I have a lot of I can explain quantum physics using one handy trick type people.
Yeah.
And a lot of retired engineers who can play with numbers and write 150 pages on how they've explained everything. But your question was how does it make me feel? In some way, I don't know if we're going to agree on this. In some ways, I kind of admire it.
Okay.
Right? Because
I'm listening.
I think the worst thing is not to care about science.
Now, that's actually a very good point by Chris, and kudos to him for being at least that pragmatic about it. Whereas, Scimandan will just fob off people questioning the belief and questioning, for example, what we're actually seeing up in the sky, and make fun of them. Where at least, okay, Chris has the cojones to understand that we're all interested in real science, and we all want to find out where we are, rather than assuming where we are.
Right. So the people who upset or who frustrate me are the people who don't even think about the universe, because I think that I just think it's sad to go about your life. I'm not saying you have to care passionately. I'm not saying you have to understand what an asteroid is, but to like not look up at the night sky or not to wonder what that might be is really difficult for me to understand.
Yeah.
Okay, again, so Chris has, he has got to the crux of the part of the issue here, in that all of us are looking up at the sky and we are wondering what it means. We are just as awestruck as an astronomer, and we are just as excited about finding out where we are. But the difference here is that we realize that nothing has been concluded, and there is no proper physics or science to truly demonstrate the belief of where we are. And it does come down to a belief, because we are talking about our origins. We are talking about something that is very close to everyone's heart, because we all want to know. If you didn't know who your mother and father were, you'd want to know. But on a larger scale, who are we? Where are we? What are our origins is still very much up for so-called debate. And there is no one on this earth, no matter what kind of qualifications or education they have, that can say for sure that they know where we came from, or where any of this came from, where the Earth came from, where stars came from, where planets came from, or how space even exists in the first place. It is a huge conundrum that no one really has the answers for. And when you talk about science, then questioning where we are and who we are is science. And if you want to talk about physics, then it has to be something that you can demonstrate rather than just cite an explanation for.
So I think at least the average conspiracy theorist, people who aren't doing politics and causing trouble, at least they're trying to understand the universe. And often they're trying to understand the universe by trying to make observations. Now, or at least, they're using aspects of what they consider common sense, right? And so, but the error they make, of course, is that the universe doesn't care two figs for our notion of common sense, right? And science, the scientific progress, such as it is over the last 400 or 500 years, is continual realization that common sense is wrong.
Yeah.
It's kind of an interesting point when he says that the universe doesn't care what we think. Now, is that just an attempt to be pragmatic and detached? Because when you think about it, what's the universe? What's the universe to us? The universe to us is the world that we exist in, the natural world that we see and experience around us. And when we look at a flower, for example, you could consider that the flower is wanting to be appreciated. Look at all the things, look at all the wonderful gifts we get from nature. Look at how everything we eat, the air that we breathe, everything, our existence depends on what is given to us by nature. And so, with all this giving from nature, the air, the water, do you not think that it might be trying to be appreciated? And actually, this guy, Chris, on the right, he's talking about this and he's excited about it. So in a way, he is appreciating the mysteries and he has the awe that we also have. Everyone has this awe, but of course some of us have the will to ask those questions, or even just try to put together one compartmentalized explanation against another one and realize that they don't actually fit together. This is what these two guys are not seeing. The globe was never something that was solidified. Curvature has never been discovered. It's always been assumed by looking up at the sky. And I'm not sure what Chris Lintot's background is on stars and what have you, but again, without anyone ever going to a star or even really knowing how they are formed, no one's ever seen a star be formed. We can assume from supernovae or whatever that we might have seen stars explode, but still doesn't kind of say anything about that. Or how did they come about in the first place? Nobody knows. Nobody knows. So this is, the whole thing. All these questions are still unanswered. They haven't been proven by any kind of science so far. Yes, we've made a lot of progress, but it's, there's a lot more progress to be made, and perhaps there are things that we will never ever know or never truly understand while we are trapped in this particular physical existence under a sky that has stars that could be right there, a few miles up. They don't have to be millions or millions of light years away or billions of miles away. They do if you have a heliocentric model in which the stars don't move from their apparent positions in order to justify this movement of the spherical Earth that you assume. But if people are able to look at stars and say, oh, that star's made of this or that, or it's emitting light that from its spectrum that means that it's got this element or that element, then maybe those stars aren't millions of miles away. Maybe they are right here in our atmosphere. And maybe that's why any photography or video we have of so-called space doesn't have any stars in it. Because maybe that is the big secret. Maybe there are no stars in so-called space. But the stars are right here in the atmosphere, and they are much more fundamental to our existence than we might initially realize. Yeah? Again, this is just theorizing without any proof, but it's no different to the theories that Chris or Scimandan might adhere to, except that people like myself, or any kind of truth seeker, can willingly change their so-called belief or point of view or understanding, or when real evidence is brought forth.
And so I think the most interesting thing is why they believe so strongly that they should be able to explain the universe.
Yeah.
Because it's the thing that gets me out of bed in the morning, every morning, is the idea that I can spend some of today, I spend a lot of it doing email and paperwork and all the rest of it. I can spend a bit of today trying to work out how the universe works.
Yeah.
And again, kudos to Chris, because he understands that it's a work in progress. But unfortunately, that both of these people still adhere to the fundamental assumption that they're on the outside of a spinning ball going around a sun. If they were able to detach from that, Chris might even have an even bigger grin on his face. And Scimandan might also be liberated from his belief. And he might not be so ready to make fun and hit pieces about flat earthers or people that are questioning his beliefs. He wouldn't have so much of an attachment to his beliefs. Yeah? So that's all any truth seeker is doing, is keeping an open mind on this work in progress, and they are being scientific, just as scientific, and if not more scientific than people sitting there making assumptions based on what they've read or had to study in order to get their degrees and what have you, and had to copy and regurgitate and memorize. Whereas, someone who's not in that sphere of education can just as easily be just as scientific as any of these two guys. As I said, in fact, more so, because we'll be making observations with an open mind rather than presupposed beliefs that we're on the outside of a spinning ball, which I think is the final point that we'll see here.
And I think that's great.
Yeah,
and I'm under no illusions common sense. So I don't know. Is that too sympathetic? Presumably,
no.
Do you just think they're wrong? And
no,
obviously they're wrong.
Yeah,
but...
well, I agree with you in some ways, because what Katz and I often say is that a lot of them would make great scientists if they didn't have these preconceived notions before they did any sort of experimentation. There's what...
Okay, see, that kind of just highlights what I've just said. Both of the, Chris on the right said, people like myself and all the other wonderful people out there doing some scientific exploration, he says that they're wrong to not believe that we're on the outside of a globe. And Scimandan there is kind of in agreement with him there, and he says that we would make great scientists. But that's the thing. What science is this exploration of the physical realm that we find ourselves in. So yes, a lot of so-called flat earthers do make great scientists because they are the ones doing experiments. They're going out there making observations without presuppositions. Personally, I heard about flat earth and then I went out and made observations and did experiments to see what I could really find out for myself. And then it's then that you find out that most people holding a belief about where we are have never actually studied the real world. They've studied books, or they can make the mathematical models, or they understand the mathematical models, and they can use that mathematical language. And we also understand that the model itself kind of makes sense in a mathematical abstract way, but it doesn't have any kind of actual basis in reality. And that when it comes to the movements of the sun and what have you, all that jazz, it's all down to interpretation. So it's quite ironic, really, that Dan is saying we would make great scientists, but yet as long as we weren't sticking to a certain belief. But these two guys are doing that. They are sticking to a certain belief without any actual knowledge of where we are. The only knowledge they have is what's been taught to us. All the same so-called knowledge that we all have. We can all repeat the explanations. We all understand that a sunset is supposed to happen because we're on a rotating Earth and it's making the sun appear to go down to the horizon and get blocked off. Yeah, we know that. We get that. It's not difficult to understand the concept, or that down is anywhere on the outside of a spherical Earth, but it's towards the center of the Earth, and all this. We all understand the concepts. They're not difficult to understand, but they've never been proven. So they're not scientific fact. They are still scientific theory. And as you know, they're not even scientific theory because no one can demonstrate gravity. No one can demonstrate that down is in all directions towards the center of a sphere. You can illustrate it on a piece of paper as a theory, but no one has ever demonstrated that in real life. And no one has ever measured any curvature in real life. These are all abstract concepts. They're all faith. You have to have faith that the Earth is curving down and away from you in the distance beyond the horizon, and that you can stick to the outside of a sphere. Can't be demonstrated, whereas the law of thermodynamics can be demonstrated. And it can be shown that even if you consider that gravity is something that exists, it's a weak force that wouldn't hold gas to the outside of a sphere against a vacuum. That doesn't stand up to scientific scrutiny. All right, I'll leave it at that. Hopefully I've made my point clear by repeatedly having to explain where Scimandan and Chris Lintott don't understand where flat earthers or truth seekers are coming from, and they don't understand the contradictions in the model in which they believe is their reality. Thank you very much. Click subscribe and the bell icon if you'd like to receive notifications of new videos from Phuket Word.